Okay, everybody, if you could just give me a quick yes or no on the hearing. Obviously, if you don't write to me, then I'll go, oh no, no one can hear me at all. But if you can hear me, that would be awesome. But if you can't, then obviously, if you, I think I'll just put it in the chat and we'll see. We'll make sure. Yay. Okay. Yeah, my chat box is super tiny, so I I don't always see when, and it doesn't scroll down automatically. I'm gonna have to get used to this whole WebEx thing because it's not. What I'll do is, I know all of you four are here at this point, but I'll just keep watching and seeing if other people come in. But the truth is even if one of you shows up, I'm going to be able to conduct class, and I'll try to talk about the, essentially whatever stories we've already covered. Now, today, because it's Thursday and tomorrow you have another story due, we will not cover that story today. I'm not going to ever cover a story before you've read it. But I might, there may be times, especially like the week that we do the metamorphosis, it's a heavy reading, and I just want to, but I don't want to, I'm not going to reveal much because I don't want to tell you any of the surprise. So I will never do, what do they call that? Where you essentially mess with people by telling them the ending of something. Spoiler alert, there will be no spoilers. So anybody who watches this, if they're watching it and they haven't turned in some journals because they haven't read something, well, that's on them. But if the stuff's already been turned in, if the journals were already due, then it's fair game to talk about, okay? So, but I will not do spoilers. I hate it when people tell me the ending of a movie. I mean, hate it. It makes me so angry because half of the joy is finding out what happens, and the other half is finding out how it happens, because that matters too. So, love stories are love stories. They always, the boy meets girl, boy and girl hate each other, and then they fall in love slowly. But how it happens matters. How things occur matter. So, I mean, it's not just the story itself, but how it's told. So anyway, but it is the story too. Not telling people the ending of something when they haven't read it yet is awful. So I will never do that if I can possibly help it. Okay, so everybody's covered this one. The journals were due. I've already graded them and everything, but do make sure, and this is partially for everybody else's benefit too, anybody who's watching this recording, is make sure that you read the comments. Don't just look at the score and go, oh, okay, I got a full credit. Go in and see what I wrote, because if you wrote questions, for instance, or you were confused about something, or whatever your interpretation was, remember, you're allowed to interpret. Even some people, for instance, in the story of an hour, hated or thought the Mrs. Mallard was crazy, and then the other half were just like, well, she's just trying to get her own freedom and stuff. So we're not all going to agree, and I'm not going to grade you on whether you agree with me. That's stupid. But I will be looking at, how can I help you grasp all the aspects of the story? And so anything that I think you're missing, I'll give you, or I'll just, even I might even compare it to other stories. There's a lot of possibility. Next week, in our discussion on Thursday, where I'm actually going to open up a discussion board for this, but I want you to be thinking about what you would like to, if there's a story so far that you enjoyed, or there's a type of story that you really like. And I can see that our numbers are going up. That's good. But I would like to know, I'd like you to start thinking about what you want to write. And so to that end, I'm just going to switch around here. I have to. Oh, let's just go here. Okay, so to that end, I'm switching over to the Blackboard course. And if you go into lessons, go into fiction, and let me go ahead and delete this for a second. Because I have a separate screen. But if you go into, it says Unit 1, the fiction essay, look at these two. Okay, so we have a prose comparison assignment, and you can do either one of these, but you need to read it first, read both assignments, and then look at, okay, which one would I rather do? I try to always have a creative option for these. So, because I always have a few creative writers, and I'm a creative writer. I like writing essays, but I love writing short stories. And so the creative fiction paper assignment actually gives you an option that's more on the short story side, if you'd rather write that. So, but and the prose comparison just asks you to pick two stories, and then on the basis of something within both stories, you're going to compare them to each other. And so you can certainly pick that as well. But what I'll do is I'll give you the instructions on Monday, in your announcements, but you'll go to the discussion board and there will be a discussion on paper topics. And ideally, you would not only present what you think you'd like to do, but also examine what other people are doing and give them ideas or feedback. So, and that way, and if you're going to write a short story, then you don't tell us the ending, because I hate that. You know that already. But you can certainly share what story do you want to kind of work from or use as your inspiration. But that's just something for you to think about. But you need to read those, and I'll put that in your thing, for Monday. But obviously, the sooner you start reading those, the sooner you'll be able to figure out, okay, what do I actually want to write my story about? And it may be we still have tons of reading, so it may be that you haven't met the short story you like yet. So you just don't know. We have some very offbeat short stories. Some of them are longer and shorter. Just make sure you keep in mind due dates so that you can get your journals done on time. Okay, so that's all there is about that. Let's talk about Blind Men and the Elephant, because I want to use that as a kind of a springboard to what we're talking about this week, because this week is all about plot. And I use plot first in all of the discussions, all the different elements of stories, because if you don't have a plot, I mean, even if you don't have an action plot, like it's not an action movie, there's still a plot. Things are happening, people are exchanging energy, or they're pushing each other this way or that way. There's conflict. If there isn't any conflict, then, well, why are we even trying? And so that's kind of the point of what we're going to talk about. But the truth is like with Blind Men and an Elephant, there's not really a plot. There sort of is, and yet it's not an adventure or something like that. So that's one reason it doesn't go in this week. But what it does do, and this is important to note, even if you don't like fiction and literature and you're just waiting for this class to be over, is that action, there's the events of the plot, and then there's often an underlying or intended significance, and it's one that is often easy. Like in this case, the Blind Man and the Elephant, it has an easy inference. We know what it means literally, but we also know what it means figuratively, like what it's representing. So many of you talked about this in your journals that you said, wow, this could be applied to us, because everybody, especially in politics, everybody sees one part of the thing, and they think they see everything. And in reality, we're all only seeing part of it. And so, but we won't talk to each other, and we don't agree with anybody else. And so we just get all snotty about it. And in the end, we don't learn from each other. So that's a problem. And yet it's one that this is actually an old fable, and it's been written in many different languages, translated in many different ways. This is just James Baldwin's version, but there are literally hundreds of versions of this story. And it's because that's a common human thing. We tend to decide on something, and then we tend to look for information and insist upon the information that backs up our own view. No one likes to be wrong. And yet, if we're not willing to listen to other points of view, we don't learn. And we would have a much greater understanding of the world if we listen to each other. Just like these men would have a much greater understanding of what the elephant really is, what makes up an elephant, because they're actually communicating with each other instead of just getting mad. So at the end, after each one of them has touched a part of the elephant, just a piece. And of course, elephants are huge, so it's easy to do that. But because they can't see it clearly all by themselves, then they just get mad at each other and insist that they're right and everybody else is wrong. I mean, they even say all they do is quarrel about the elephant. Each believed he knew just how the animal looked. Each called the others hard names because they did not agree with him. People who have eyes sometimes act as foolishly. That last part, that little thing, of course, are we blind? Physically, no, although mine's debatable. I have old people eyes, so I'm pretty blind actually. But for the most part, we can see. So we could see an elephant and we could see, the whole part of him. And yet there are far more complex ideas that we don't see eye to eye on. And it's mainly because we only see part of the equation. We only see part of the what's going on, and we don't see the whole thing. And much of it is because we want to have an opinion. How do you feel when, and I know there are teachers, have you ever had a teacher, for instance, who you ask, they say, oh, any question, no question's a stupid question. And then you ask them a question and they don't know the answer. And so they tell you to hush and not ask any questions. Have you ever had that happen? Open up chat again so I can see. So have you ever had a teacher go, no, there's no stupid questions, and then it's all about, oh, well, your questions are stupid because I don't know the answer? There are teachers who will not say, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I actually do that. I teach humanities. And so there's so much in humanities that you just can't remember all of it. And so students will say, well, what about this? I don't know. Let me go look that up. Now, can we look up a lot of information if we don't know it? Do you look up stuff on your phones all the time? Because I do. I'm constantly, yesterday I was actually observing a political science class at another high school, and um, they were talking about, oh, there's this guy and he killed his, like, execution style, killed all three of his sons, and then called the police, and they said, I think that was in, and I can't remember what state they thought it was in, Kentucky or something. Well, I looked it up and it was in Ohio, but I wanted to know what state it happened in. And then they talked about something else, and they said, oh, well, the Supreme Court's, I guess, yeah, the Supreme Court in South Carolina, which is now all male. There was one female and she's been replaced. And they said, well, they were deciding something, and they said, well, we voted for him. And the truth is, and I looked it up to make sure, but the Supreme Court in South Carolina is appointed. It's not voted. So we didn't vote anybody in, if you think about it. But it's those kinds of looking. Do you look up stuff like that? Do you look up, oh, let me ask you this. Do you look up, if you see an actor in a movie or a show and you go, who is that guy? And you look up the cast for the show, and then you look up to see what else he's in. Have you ever done that? I did that like 2 days ago. I did it with, oh, what's the Netflix show about Sandman? And it turns out the guy who plays Sandman has been in a bunch of other movies. So, do you do that? And I can't see. There's no more chat. Okay, I'm at somebody's, yay, people are saying yes. Okay, so we're constantly, I mean, in a way too, especially because you guys are young people, you're more likely to look stuff up if you don't know. And your phones are a fantastic resource because you can look up, an article that, somebody reads something on Reddit and they go, can you believe? And you go, oh, I don't know, that's true. You can look it up and find out if it's actually true. And so you can look up how things can be skewed. You can look up both sides of all sorts of stuff. And you're more likely to do that than your parents and grandparents are. Because often, as we get older, especially, we get very set in what we think. And then we really don't want to consider new possibilities. We want to just think that we're right. So in a way, this is kind of talking about us. This is applicable to any culture, any time period. People tend to gravitate to what they already know and are really reluctant or even dismissive of other modes of thinking, other ways of feeling or believing, other ways of living. And, we just get set in our ways. That's what we do. So in some ways, that's what it's kind of dealing with there. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this so I can get to my other screens. But let's talk about, we have the road from Colonus, and it is not, I mean, it's obviously longer than this one. Okay, that's the shooting. Where? that's the wrong one. Let me move some things over. Maybe that's the one. Yeah, that's the road from Colonus. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about E.M. Forster. I'm not going to talk a lot about these authors. There will be times like when you take them, you already took American Lit, did you not? Or did you? Did you take American Literature already? I feel like you took it last year. A lot of schools are doing that. So I'm going to just make this a little bit bigger and scroll over so that we can just see the, okay, I have to make it a little smaller. Okay. So the truth is E.M. Forster writes everything from very, in his time period. He wrote just a little bit late. He wrote in the Victorian era, but he was British. So he wrote about this, think about it as about the same time period as Story of an Hour. But I don't know that it really matters because what he was writing about wasn't about Victorian era anything. Instead, he was writing about, essentially, he's writing about a family, and especially this older man. Now, what you need to know, and this is something that he would have known, but you guys probably don't. Have any of you read Oedipus the King? It's a Greek drama. Okay, no. Okay, have you heard of the Oedipus complex? In psychology? No? Okay, so still no. Okay, so lots of no's. If you have not read, okay, so let's talk about the Oedipus complex. It was actually started, this is a psychology thing. So I'm going to talk about a bunch of different little things that kind of go with this. And then we're going to go back to the plot, look at the plot really quick, and then we're going to say, okay, we'll see this is what it means. So first of all, the Oedipus complex it's a Freudian term. So Sigmund Freud came up with it. I don't think I necessarily agree with it, but he claims there's a stage at which young boys, identify very strongly with their moms. Like they love their moms. They a lot of kids do this where they get, oh, I want to marry my mom someday. Well, you can't do that. That's incest. But they really like their mom, and they often have confrontations with their dad. Well, Freud said, well, it's like Oedipus, the Greek, essentially tragic king, who loved his mom and killed his dad. And so what this comes from is actually a real story in Oedipus, and I'm not going to tell you the whole ending, but Oedipus, the king, who was actually the king of Thebes, was actually adopted. He was abandoned as a baby by his dad and mom, who were the king of Thebes. But he was abandoned because they were told by the oracle at Delphi that foretold the future in Greek tragedy, that the son was going to kill Laius, the dad, and he was going to marry Jocasta, the mom. And so they said, well, we don't want that. And so they threw the kid, literally, they gave the kid to a messenger who was supposed to, they tied his feet together, and his name is Oedipus because it means swollen foot. But they tied his feet together and were supposed to abandon him to die out in the woods. Well, the messenger just couldn't do it. It's just a baby. You can't do that to babies. And so he gave him to a shepherd out in the woods, and the shepherd took him and gave him to the king and queen of Corinth, who didn't have a kid. And so they were ecstatic, and they raised him like their own child. He didn't even know he was adopted. Then he finds out, somebody insinuates at a bar or something that he wasn't actually his parents' kid. Well, he goes to the oracle at Delphi, exactly same place, and he says, are my parents really my parents, or was I adopted? And they, instead of answering the question, they say, you're going to kill your dad and marry your mom. And he goes, and freaks out and runs away from Corinth, where his mom and dad are king and queen, his not real mom and dad. And he runs into these crossroads, and at the crossroads there's a man in a little raised chair, and he's being carried by 4 servants, which was typical at this time. And the man tells the young dude, Oedipus, get out of my way. And Oedipus is like, I'm going this way, just you get out of my way. And the man sicks his 4 servants on Oedipus to kill him. Oedipus kills 3 of the servants, one runs away, and then he kills Laius when Laius raises his stiff to strike him. He doesn't know at that point, of course, that Laius is the king of Thebes and his dad, his real dad. Then he, feels kind of bad because he killed a bunch of people, but he goes into Thebes, and Thebes is they have a horrible, the Sphinx is there terrorizing everybody, and people are dying of disease and bad stuff's happening. But the Sphinx has this riddle that no one can solve. Well, Oedipus says, well, let me see if I can solve it. And so he solves the riddle with the Sphinx. The Sphinx goes away. Everybody's in arms and happy and, rejoicing that Oedipus has saved them all. And they say, well, our king is gone. We don't know what happened to him. Laius is gone. But you want to be king because you saved us. And he goes, sure. And they said, well, we also have this queen here, and she's older, but she's pretty. You want to marry her? And Oedipus says, sure. And so he marries Jocasta, his own mom. Okay, so that's all I'm going to get to, but that's where the Oedipus complex comes from, that the young boy wants to marry his mom and kill his dad, essentially, is what Freud said. Now, I think it's bunk. That's just me. But it comes from this Greek myth. Now, the reason its significance to this story is the title. It's called The Road from Colonus, and they are in Greece. And the road to Colonus is actually there's a tragedy of Oedipus the King. That's the Greek play. And then there's one that you sometimes read. It's called Antigone, and that's actually his daughter. And it's her tragedy. But that's the third in the series. In the middle is Oedipus at Colonus. And it's because Oedipus is wandering. He banishes himself from Thebes, and he's wandering on the trail to go to essentially death. He's going to the hole in the ground that the Greeks believed in that would lead to stairs going down to Hades, to the place of the underworld. And so that's where he was going to meet death. And he actually does. He wanders, he says bye-bye to his daughters, and he wanders down the stairs and, disappears. And that's the end of that play. And so that's what this is based on. This is what it's dealing with, is this Mr. Lucas is actually in that spot. And he has choices, and he has instincts, and yet he's argued out of them. And it kind of raises a question, I guess, if you want to think about it that way. So what happens in this story? What they're in Greece, I've already established that, and they're right about near Colonus. And Mr. Lucas, who's Mr. Lucas traveling with? We know he's old, because it says he was perhaps reaching the age at which independence becomes valuable because it is so soon to be lost. What does that mean? He's old. And so how old is he? Like, would you say? If he's reaching the age where independence is soon to be lost, when does that happen? Now, I know you guys are young. Yeah, so at that point, he's retired. And then what happens to him physically and mentally as we get older and older and older? Maybe he gets to the point where he can't live on his own. He can't drive anymore. There are people who either their eyesight gets so bad they can't drive, or they just, like my grandpa went through this whole thing where he kept running stop signs because, oh, I didn't see it. Oh, I didn't see it. And he kept getting into these wrecks because he wasn't paying attention anymore. So he finally had his license taken away because he couldn't drive. He just really couldn't pay attention enough to drive well. He was going to hit someone. He was an accident waiting to happen. Maybe it gets to the point even where they can't do their own laundry or make their own food, or they certainly can't drive anymore. So they have to have somebody driving around, but maybe they need in-care help, or they move in either next door to their kids or in the same house with the kids. And it seems pretty clear by the end of this at the very end, let's look at the very end. When he's with his daughter at the end, Ethel is in the same house with him, right? So she's kind of his caretaker at that point, by that point. Okay, so that's kind of what we're talking about. So he's old, and he's old to the point, he's almost at the beginning of this story, to the point where he can't really take care of himself. Okay, so, and they're traveling by donkey, it looks like. Yeah, muleteer. And he keeps and a lot of mules can be pretty stubborn, but he's going on through, and in some ways he doesn't like being taken care of already. And he doesn't like the reminder that he's old and all these other people in his party are young, and including his daughter. And so they're away, here they are in Greece, they're doing a travel, and it may be the last real travel he gets to do, because he may just never be healthy enough to go travel again. And I don't know if you have relatives. I have several relatives that they just don't travel anymore. Even an airplane flight is exhausting for them, and they can't, it would take 2 or 3 days for them to recover from something like that. And so from that point on, of course, then everybody travels to them because they really can't make the trip. Some people are just too ill, or they need oxygen, or they have health issues that make it really impossible even to drive a couple of hours. And so people just go visit those people. And so this is really his last big trip before he really isn't going to go anywhere. And so how does Greece compare to England? I mean, obviously he's used to being just in England, and he even says the trees would have been huge and covered with green. But in Greece, there aren't that many trees, because they have they're scorched by the heat of an April sun. And that includes these people, so they've been riding around in the hot sun anyway. And so now they find this kind of oasis where there are trees, there's an inn, and it even describes it. In their midst was a tiny khan, or country inn, a frail mud building with a broad wooden balcony on which sat an old woman spinning, while a small brown pig eating orange peel stood beside her. So just a little like mud hut type thing, essentially. Now, what happens though, because this is what we're talking about plot, what happens when they get there? So Mr. Luke, they brought their own food with them, so they don't have to eat the local food, probably because it's Greek, as opposed to English food. And Ethel is with him, and she's his youngest daughter, still unmarried. She was unselfish and affectionate, and it was generally understood that she was to devote her life to her father and be the comfort of his old age. So he already has a caregiver. She's just not having to do much now, but she will. It's almost like he knows this. And then even at this point, it comes up with Oedipus. There's Oedipus right there that I mentioned. He had this in common with Oedipus, that he was growing old. Even to himself, it had become obvious. And so it even talks about some of the effects that he notices. Like, he doesn't care about other people's affairs. He seldom even listens, so he seldom attended when they spoke to him. He was fond of talking himself, but often forgot what he was going to say, and even when he succeeded, it seldom seemed worth the effort. His phrases and gestures had become stiff and set. His anecdotes, once so successful, fell flat, probably because he repeats them. I don't know if you've ever met, and I know people who are, younger than me, who repeat stories over and over again. I'm thinking, you already told me this. But so he talks, he likes to talk, but he doesn't really like to listen. And it says, yet he had led a healthy, active life, had worked steadily, made money, educated his children. There was nothing and no one to blame. He was simply growing old, which, beats the alternative, right? You think. So now he's in Greece, and he even says, Greece is the land for young people. But I will enter into it. I will possess it. Leaves shall be green again. Water shall be sweet. The sky shall be blue. They were so 40 years ago. So yeah, he's probably, that was when he was a very young man, and I will win them back. I do mind being old, and I will pretend no longer. So he knows he's really facing his age at this point. And so then we get to the con, and they're going to eat lunch and everything else. But what does he want to do? I mean, a lot of this is just kind of setting too. And he steps through the stream, I guess, and that, it really talks about those sensations. He definitely finds something here that he likes. And so, because he remember, he went ahead, and then he was stepping through the thing, looking at the con, the little inn, and he was, and he could feel the cold stream in his foot, on his feet and stuff. And of course, the fact that he's using his feet, that those sensations are all over his feet, is really important, because again, it's a reference to Oedipus and his little swollen feet. And so, while he's sitting there in the, standing in the stream, enjoying the cool water and stuff like that, everybody else arrives. And in some ways, he finds them all annoying, including Ethel to an extent. He just doesn't want to be, in some ways, he's just, the reminding that he's old and they're young is not good. So, of course, now what happens? Mr. Graham, a young man who is always polite to his elders, says to him, he's standing in the stream, okay, and he says, "Allow me to give you a hand. Like, you must be having trouble going through a stream because you're an old man." Now, have you ever had anybody try to offer you help like that? That's kind of like patronizing, and you're like, "I don't need help with this," and it is annoying. Some people get annoyed by everything, but he is pretty annoyed. He's like, and he even says, "Thank you, I can manage perfectly well by myself." And of course, his foot slipped as he stepped out of the tree and went into the spring. And Ethel's like, "Oh, what are you doing? Like, you got your foot wet. Thank goodness I have a change for you in the mule." And then it even said, "She tended to him carefully, giving him clean socks and dry boots, and then sat him down on the rug beside the lunch basket while she went with the others to explore the grove." So, oh no, come on, little kiddo. She's treating him. I mean, when's the last time somebody put on shoes and socks for you? Can you remember? How old? You can tell me this. How old were you? Last time when did you learn to tie your shoes? Okay, so Andrea, you were 5. Yay, somebody answered. So the very last time anyone put on shoes and socks for you, you were 5. And so that means, if she's, here she is giving him clean socks and dry boots, sat him here, sit right down here. Come on, Dad. And then she and all the young people go off to explore while he's just sitting on the rug. And it says they came back in ecstasies, in which Mr. Lucas tried to join, but he found them intolerable. Their enthusiasm was superficial, commonplace, and spasmodic. They had no perception of it's like it was just so beautiful down there. Oh my gosh, and there's this tree, it's so pretty, and oh my goodness, the view, and the sun is so bright, whatever. He just, it just ticks him off, probably because he's not really included. Remember, he didn't go. He sat on the blanket waiting for them to come back. And he says, "Well, it's a really nice place. Trees are fine, remarkably fine for Greece, and there's something very poetic in the spring of clear running water," which is what he was just kind of thinking before they all came up and met him. "The people, too, seem kindly and civil. It's decidedly an attractive place." And of course, Mrs. Foreman says, "Oh, no, it's so wonderful. I could live and die here." And then she even says, "It reminds me of the Colonus of Sophocles," which is, Sophocles was the guy who wrote Oedipus the King. And so she, again, it's constantly reminding us, hey, what about Oedipus the King? So, And so then you guys, and it even says, and she says, well, I must stop, Ethel says. I positively must. And she says, yes, do. You and your father, Antigone and Oedipus. That's Antigone was Oedipus's daughter. Of course you must stop at Colonus. Of course, these are two tragic figures. And Mr. Lucas really likes that idea. Mr. Lucas was almost breathless with excitement. When he stood within the tree, he had believed that his happiness would be independent of locality. But it feels like Colonus is the place to go. And he even says to sleep in the con with the gracious, kind-eyed country people, to watch the bats flit about with it in the globe of shade, and see the moon turn the golden patterns into silver. That would be awesome. One such night would place him beyond relapse and confirm him forever in the kingdom he had regained. So he's like epic excitement. Oh, I would love to stay here, but he says, oh, I should be willing to put in a night here. And she says, you mean a week, Papa? It would be sacrilege to put in less. So he could stay here a week. A week then, a week, said his lips, irritated at being corrected, while his heart was leaping with joy. In other words, in some ways, he's like the older woman's expression. I could live and die here. He would absolutely stay. And there's something in it, again, but remember, Colonus is where Oedipus goes to die. And so now we're getting to this other part of it. Lucas is like, yeah, we're going to stay. So we're just going to keep, so it says, tonight, thought Mr. Lucas. Now, this is a thought, even though it's in quotes. They will light the little lamp by the shrine, and when we all sit together on the balcony, perhaps they will tell me which offerings they put up. So, in other words, they'll tell me about the offerings at the altar, because we assume Greek, pagan, still Greek mythology type stuff. And he's, again, thinking to himself. So Graham says, oh, we need to get up. You need to get up. So, because we have to fold up the lunch rug. And he's thinking still, oh, it's going to be great. Ethel's going to go to bed first. Then I'll try to tell them about my offering too. For it is a thing I must do. I think they will understand if I'm left with them alone. And it's the first time he's talked about something like that. It sounds epic, but what is he going to offer? And Ethel touches him on his cheek. Papa, I've called you 3 times. All the mules are here. Mules? What mules? And she says, our mules. Oh, come on. And he goes, I don't know what you're talking about. And she goes, we have to go. We have to get to Olympia tonight. And he goes, he says, you know perfectly well we're putting in a week here. It's your own suggestion. And Ethel says, well, I was joking. Of course I meant I wished we could. And Mrs. Foreman is, oh, if only we got what we wished. And Ethel's like, surely you didn't think I meant it. So he's thinking of this epic, we're going to stay here for a week. And it's going to be the most beautiful week. And I'm going to finally kind of come to terms with my age. And everything's going to be beautiful. And I'm going to give up an offering, whatever that offering happens to be. Hopefully you guys, can figure out what the offering is at the end. So essentially, he starts insisting, you said that we should stop here, and we are stopping. So he's like, I'm not going to go. I'm staying. And everybody, at the end, they recognize that these people are arguing, even if it's in English. And he's not moving. He's not going. Come on, we need to go. No, I'm not leaving. We got to get back to England. Why do I need to go back to England? Who would miss me? His friends were dead or cold. Ethel loved him in a way, but as was right, she had other interests. His other children he seldom saw. Why would he go back? And this is one of those cruxes of a life. Like, am I even going in the direction that I really should be? Why would I go back to England? And essentially, Ethel goes in to look at the rooms just to appease her dad. And finally she comes out and she goes, my dear Papa, I'll do all I can for you, but we cannot stop in that con. And Mrs. Foreman said, are there fleas? And she said, she kind of, essentially, it was worse than that. And And Mrs. Foreman says, "Oh, well, then that settles it. I know how particular Mr. Lucas is." And he says, "It does not settle it. Ethel, you go on. I do not want you. I don't know why I ever consulted you. I shall stop here alone." Now, do they let him stay? No. No, 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 no. In fact, Ethel is kind of insulting. How can you be left alone at your age? How would you get your meals or your bath? All your letters are waiting for you. You'll miss the boat. That means missing the London operas and upsetting all your engagements for the month. As if you could travel by yourself. I mean, think about that. As if you could travel by yourself. Now, maybe it's true, but it is still insulting. And then Mr. Graham says they might knife you. Like, don't trust the Greek people. The Greeks said nothing. But when Mr. Lucas looked their way, they beckoned him towards the con. Like, come on. Now, were they just trying to, you know, get money? Oh, probably. But they were definitely welcoming. And he's like, he really wants to leave. And it says, so soon they would be tired and go chattering away into the sun, leaving him to the cool grove and the moonlight and the destiny he foresaw. This is his destiny, he sees. What is his destiny? What does he think is going to happen? It's kind of what happens. He doesn't know what's going to happen, but it's what happens. What happens once they leave? They don't give him a choice. Mr. Graham helps and he is forced to go. In fact, one of the little boys throws a stone at him and is angry. And they run away even faster. Probably they're just mad because they chose not to come to the inn. I don't know. We don't know. But he wanted to stay. And what happened after they left? Did you catch what happened? Yeah. So one of those curious tricks of mountain scenery, the place they had left an hour before suddenly reappeared far below them. So because it's Greece is very mountainous. It's actually that's probably one reason why the Greeks were very much into they were very good sailors because travel over the mountains was almost impossible. So now they're traveling, of course, over the mountains, but the con was hidden under the green dome of the tree. But in the open there still stood three figures, and through the pure air rose up a faint cry of defiance or farewell. And it says, Ethel says, "Let's go," and he turns again. He obeyed, and in another moment, a spur of the hill hid the dangerous scene forever. So one more temptation, looking back. And then we're back in England. And what happened? Now she's taking care of him. He's at home, but she's, making sure essentially it's breakfast time. And Ethel, who was to be married in a few weeks, had her arms on the table listening. So she's about to get married. She was supposed to do what? Take care of him the rest of his life, right? Well, she's getting married. And she's serving him breakfast though at the moment. So what do they find? What happened after they left? So we have it. I have Haley's the only one who put in anything, but she said the people died. So what happens? A rural disaster. Oh, I've hit on something sad, but never mind. Last Tuesday at Platanist in the province of Messenia, a shocking tragedy occurred. A large tree blew down in the night and crushed to death the 5 occupants of the little con there, who had apparently been sitting on the balcony. So the proprietress, Maria, the daughter, both of those were easily recognizable, but whereas that of her grandson And it says, what is more, I feel like I have heard the name Platanis before. We didn't stop there, did we? And Mr. Lucas says, we had lunch. And there he has a faint expression of trouble on his vacant face. Of course. How terrible. And he says, very terrible. But he's already, his mind's going. And it says, this is an old paper. It happened not lately, but in April, the night of Tuesday the 18th. And we must have been there in the afternoon. So what would have happened to the man if he'd stayed? If Mr. Lucas had insisted, no, we are staying, or I am staying, fine, you go on. He even said, I don't want you. You go on to England, I'll stay here. He would have been crushed by the tree. And how do you think he feels about this? Do you think, I mean, he may, at least back at that time, may have thought this is fate for me to stay here, and he would have been killed. What is he facing now? And this is not my expression. This is coming from the author. What is he facing now? He didn't die under a tree. And we don't know how much longer he's going to live. He could live for a long, long time. But his mind's going, his daughter's leaving, so his caregiver is going. What's going to happen now? It's kind of depressing. So maybe, and this is again a contended, had he stayed, it's like he missed his chance to be part of the epic, the saga that was Oedipus, because he missed, he went on the road from Colonus. He left, and he should have stayed. Had he stayed, he would have died, but he wouldn't have lived the rest of his years lonely, with his mind fading, with things. There are a lot of people, especially when they get to that point, who just go, okay, I've heard people say, it's fine if I'm in a wheelchair, but please don't let my mind be going. And I've seen people who are in the best of physical health who have no understanding or memory of their own family members. And I've seen people who have very, poor physical health, but their mind's sharp as a tack, right? It sounds as if, though, it's mostly his mind that's going. And it was probably already starting to earlier, only now it's really gone. Does that make sense? So it's not just that he wanted to stop at an inn and he didn't, and then he left, and then everybody's crushed at the inn. It's that this means something, that where he might have stopped might have made his life end tragically but epically, as opposed to him just fading off into existence, which is what's happening now. But you notice at the end, she says, and this is kind of the irony that's like the story of an hour. Such a marvelous deliverance does make one believe in providence, that he was saved from being killed in that inn that night. And he did not reply. So he, in some ways, you can certainly assume, or at least conjecture that it's possible, that he looks at this and goes, wow, this could have been me, and it could have ended differently. And he may even have been wishing for that, which is really sad, but it's also, there's a reality to it. You guys may not understand. I'm still way too young to want to do anything like that, but everybody's a little different. Okay, so let's talk about, we have about 12 more minutes. Let's talk about George Orwell's Shooting of an Elephant. Now, George Orwell, if you ever, the other guy was a novelist too. E.M. Forster wrote A Room with a View and a bunch of other actually pretty good novels. I enjoyed them. George Orwell wrote 1984, which is really based on his observations of Russia, communist Russia. Well, no, the USSR, the Soviet Union, before it all broke apart. And that's where we get the term Big Brother, is from that novel, 1984. He also wrote Animal Farm. And have either of you read either of those? Animal Farm is kind of a parable, but it has all these different animals on a farm. and the pigs essentially they rebel against the farmer, but then they try to set up a sort of, you know, state of equality, and yet eventually the pigs take over and become the, you know, the despots. And the animals are not all equal. Well, they are all equal, but some are more equal than others. That's what they come up with. Good. Andrea has read Animal Farm. Has anybody else read Animal Farm? It's a really disturbing book. I read it in junior high, I think in 8th grade, 7th or 8th grade. But it's definitely the whole idea of how we end up going along with bad changes, because either we feel like we don't know enough to speak up, or we don't listen to the people who do speak up, or the people who speak up about it. Like there was a donkey in there, and bad things happened to him because of that. So what happens in shooting an elephant? You guys, while I'm gonna write down everybody who's here, and then if you guys would tell me what the plot is. Let's start with plot. It's not it's a quick plot. It happens in, you could sum it up in a few sentences. Okay, so let's see. Nobody? Oh, you're probably typing. That's okay. Okay. Yeah, where is this? What's the setting? Do you have any idea? Now, this is a British author. Where's Lower Burma? Think India. Now, let's think about India, though. Okay, and that whole area. Now, the British Empire spanned many different places. They had lands on almost, well, pretty much every continent. There are British holdings, British islands in the Caribbean. There were, of course, the United States used to be British colonies. Canada is under the auspices of Great Britain even today. India was for a very long time, and India was one of those that was taken by force, along with many of the other ones in like the Middle East and in Southern Asia. What that meant was, and it's kind of similar to the way that it was going here in the colonies until we said, no, we're not doing this, and rebelled. What happened is, you know, very soon after the American colonists started demanding things from Great Britain, Britain replaced the American governors, the colonial governors, with British subjects. So they essentially would boot out the person who would, you know, was living in the Americas, and they would replace him with somebody who had just come up over a ship, you know, over on a ship from Britain. And they did the same thing in Northern Ireland, for instance. They replaced all of the landed gentry they kicked out, and they replaced them with British people. You know, British peers would get land awarded from England. And so the Irish were all kind of kicked out, and they were all into sort of enforced poverty. They did this in Scotland as well. Well, they did this pretty much in India and most of these territories around India as well. So what they did is, you know, for instance, the government was pretty much run by British people, even though it was in India. The military was either completely British soldiers or trained Indian soldiers, or in this case, Burmese soldiers, but they were trained and they had to speak English. They were given orders in English, and all of the way that they did everything was by British policy. The courts in India and many of these other countries, if you, for instance, got a parking ticket or you know, a speeding ticket or something, even something trivial, you'd go to court, and the court was conducted in English. So if you didn't speak English, Wow, you had to have an interpreter, or your lawyer better be able to speak English, and you had an automatic disadvantage. They ran all aspects. They ran the banks, they ran, I mean, they ran everything. And so it left the Burmese people without, really powerless. And it left I mean, same with India. The populations in India were powerless. But it also meant that those British subjects were resented. So the reason people hate him is not because he's a bad dude. It's because he is English. Had he not been from, he was the representative of this regime that had taken over the country without the people really wanting it to. Does that make sense? So the reason they don't like him is just because of who he is and where he came from. And the fact that he is in authority over them without their permission. They didn't want him. They just don't have a choice. And of course, he is also insulting of them, because he has the same prejudices that many people at that time had of those that were under their control. In the same way that, honestly, it's not just um, people whose skin were slightly darker or something. I mean, they were prejudiced against, they still are kind of against Scottish people and the Northern Irish. And, we have prejudices against anybody who's not, especially those that we are in power over. It's very easy to have a prejudice against someone that we have all the control over. We're dismissive of them. So during slavery, for instance, and it really started, it definitely is a carryover from there. There was definite dismissal of slaves because they couldn't possibly be as smart or as capable or as able of taking care of themselves as people who owned them. And so it was just a way of creating this sort of, it's slavery's fine because those people deserved it or something. In the same way, that's what he's justifying. The British Empire believed it was right for them to take over all these places, and they saw themselves as superior to all the places they took over. And all the people even, uses words. Did you notice some of his words? Like, he uses some that honestly, they're really horrible. I mean, not only does he talk about sneering yellow faces, yellow, yeah, because they're so absolutely yellow. I hate it when people use things like that. But then he says, and he even talks about the wretched prisoners huddling in the stinking cages of the lockups, the gray cowed faces of the long-term convicts, the scarred buttocks of the men who had been flogged with bamboos. All these oppressed me with an intolerable sense of guilt. So he is dismissive of them, and yet you can tell he feels bad about it too. Why were they flogged? Who flogged them? British people flogged them. Why were they flogged? Because they broke laws, probably, that the British people had invented and brought over. And so he has to serve the British Empire, but at the same time, and he sort of understands the hatred of the empire, but at the same time, the hatred is turned on him. And so he says, all I knew is I was stuck between my hatred of the empire I served and my rage against the evil-spirited little beasts who tried to make my job impossible. And so he's really straddling a line. Now, what happened? Why does this elephant even come up? What does the elephant do? It says it was a tiny incident in itself, but it gave me a better glimpse than I had before of the real nature of imperialism. And that's when one country establishes an empire by taking over other countries. That's the real motives for which despotic governments act. One early morning, he got a call, and an elephant was ravaging the bazaar. So it's like a market area. Would I please come and do something? And he got on a pony and started out. He took a rifle, a 44 Winchester, and much too small to kill an elephant. But I thought the noise might be useful. Like, it might freak the elephant out, or stop all of this, or whatever. And he was actually, as he was going that direction, people are, shouting out to him, "Hey, there's the elephant's that way," and all the things the elephant had done. It was not a wild elephant, but a tame one, which had gone must. So in other words, it had like lost its mind a little bit. It had been chained up, as tame elephants always are when their attack of must is due. So it's like he's going, I don't know, rogue. He's going to, like, in heat or something. But on the previous night, it had broken its chain and escaped. And the only person who could manage it had set out in pursuit, but had taken the wrong direction, was now 12 hours journey away. And the elephant suddenly reappeared in town. Now it's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever seen photos of Alaska, and like the fact that whole moose literally show up, and caribou, somebody can walk out their front lawn to go to work and there's a caribou, or even a couple of them standing in their front lawn. So he's in much more of the wilder, we don't have elephants wandering around for the most part. We don't have that. First of all, we don't have any native elephants in our country, but they do. And the Burmese population had no weapons. Why do they have no weapons? Any ideas? Any guesses? Are the Burmese people allowed to have weapons? I mean, the majority, right. So they're not allowed to have weapons, but they couldn't probably have afforded them anyway. But yeah, I mean, how do you quell a population that doesn't want you there? Well, you take away all their weapons and you're the only ones with weapons. It makes it real easy. And so you notice too that this guy had a gun, even if it wasn't enough to take down an elephant, it was a gun. And it said it had already destroyed somebody's bamboo hut, killed a cow, and raided some fruit stalls and devoured the stock. It had also met the municipal rubbish van, for like the trash pickup, when the driver jumped out and took to his heels, had turned the van over and inflicted violences upon it. And so when he finally gets there, what happens? Okay, the elephant's calm, but what has the elephant done? I rounded the hut. So everybody's like running, go away, go away this instant. There's a woman shooing away a bunch of little children. I rounded the hut and saw a man's dead body sprawled in the mud. Now, how did he kill him? The elephant had come suddenly upon him round the corner of the hut, caught him with its trunk, put its foot on his back, and ground him into the earth. Yes. And it says, and so it's horrible too. His face was coated with mud, his eyes wide open, the teeth bared and grinning with an expression of unendurable agony. Um, and the friction of the great beast's foot had stripped the skin from his back. As soon as I saw the dead man, I sent an orderly to a friend's house nearby to borrow an elephant rifle. I'd already sent back the pony, not wanting to go mad with fright and throw me. So in other words, he sent, but so do you feel like he has? Okay, so here's the elephant. The elephant's calm, right? And it's just sitting there. It's not. It's done with all the mad stuff. As soon as I saw the elephant, I knew with perfect certainty that I ought not to shoot him. But everybody's watching. 2,000 at least watching him, growing every minute. It blocked the road for the long distance on either side. And it even says they were watching me as they would a conjurer about to perform a trick. They did not like me, but with a magical rifle in my hands, I was momentarily worth watching. And suddenly I realized that I should have to shoot the elephant after all. What if he doesn't? What if he doesn't shoot the elephant? What would happen? He would lose respect from the people. Yeah, the town would, they would hate him. The town will still hate him, probably. But um, but he would not, I mean, it makes him look weak. Like, oh, he can't even shoot an elephant. And his, do we do that though? Are there times when we could be merciful and not exact punishment and it would probably be better, and yet we don't want to seem weak? I mean, I'm certainly, absolutely, there are teachers who do this, right? Who, oh no, this is the rule, you have detention for this week, and because I'm not going to make any blah blah blah. But it was because of and they just don't. There's a fine line between choosing mercy and just letting people get away with whatever. And so he would have been viewed, had he not, he would have been viewed as weak. And that would have affected the view of the British government. Oh, they can take care of us, but they can be weak. There might have been more upheavals. Instead, what happened? What happened to the elephant after it died? Well, it wasn't even dead after he shot it. Yeah. And in the meantime, people were like taking stuff off of it, like meat. It was horrible. And do you think, based on what this guy wrote, do you think he internalized every single bit of these things? Do you think he feel bad about shooting the elephant? And will he for the rest of his life? Yeah. The owner was furious, but that doesn't mean anything. It's the elephant dying the way it did. And so, it may be, I mean, I don't know that this is not likely to happen to you guys, but it may be that you have to make choices that you're uncomfortable with and take actions that may not be right to manage a desperate situation. It's almost like this guy's at war. I mean, he's having to shoot a foe that isn't really his foe. And it's never he's not going to be the same because of it. He's going to be forever changed because of this, because of the suffering he caused. And yet did he have a choice? I mean, I guess that's the question. But we'll see I haven't graded the journals on this one yet, so we'll see what you guys say. For next time, we're reading actually another story. It's the one for tomorrow. It's another story by the woman who wrote Story of an Hour. So, but it's a little bit longer. It's not a lot longer though. It's very readable. It's one of my favorite of her stories. So, any questions? I'll go ahead and stop the recording, but if you have questions, just type them in the chat box, okay? And if not, I will see y'all later. Because we did good. We got through kind of what we needed to. But if you have any questions, stay and type them in. And I promise I won't leave until you guys are all gone.